Just staying with the theme of HAV, I thought it'd be worth a quick revision on some of the different types of big toe joint conditions. I find it helpful to think of these in 4 different clusters, 4 different families, because the 4 different clusters have very distinctive treatment plans. There are nuances and connotations and things which are outside of these clusters, but the majority fall within these. And they are hallux rigidus, hallux limitus, hallux adductor valgus, and bunion. So hallux rigidus is when the big toe joint does not bend. So it's end stage, it's rigid, it won't move at all. Hallux limitus is where it will bend, but either its range or its quality of movement is limited. So there is some function there, but not sufficient. Hallux abductor valgus, and in this you could also put hallux abductus and hallux valgus separately. These are the positional deformities. These are the foot's a funny shape, the bones are in a funny position. And then you've got a bunion, which is an inflamed bursa on usually the medial or dorsomedial side of a big toe joint, which is usually a secondary complication of hallux abductor valgus. In other words, you've got a lumpy bit because of the funny shapes, and then you get a painful bit on the top. Now, the reason I find these helpful categories is because these are divided very much on your management strategy. If you have to have a hallux rigidus, a big toe joint that will not bend, doesn't matter what you do to it, it's not going to bend. So from a conservative point of view, our goal is around trying to compensate for the consequences of not having that joint. And from a surgical point of view, obviously, they're usually trying to put some movement back in it. Hallux limitus is where there is some movement, but it is inadequate or it is painful or both. Our goal from a conservative point of view is to try and get more movement and for that movement to be more comfortable. And from a surgical point of view is probably much the same, but using a different approach. For a hallux abductor valgus, a pure positional deformity, our goal is no longer to try and get movement in there because it's potentially already there. It's simply a funny shape. And there's very little that we can do conservatively about that. As we've discussed, night splints don't really work, and most of the other things are just pure woo. So there's not a great deal we can do conservatively. Obviously, this is where pod surgeons really excel because they're very, very good at making things foot-shaped again. And finally, when you've got your inflamed bursitis, your bunion, your painful consequence of a funny-shaped foot, the primary and the best treatment is always going to be to try and stop that pressure on the outside of the joint, so address the footwear. And if that doesn't work, then from a surgical point of view, if you change the shape of the foot, then you will reduce the pressure on it. So yeah, 4 different families of conditions: rigidus, limitus, funny shaped foot, and painful funny shaped foot because something's pressing on it.